Welcome, Doubts Aloud listeners, to this what's going to be probably the most fascinating and quite different episode than we've done before. We're going down into the murky depths of the subterranean Atlantis ocean and talking about Atlantis.
No, surely not.
Yes.
What's that got to do with religion?
Funnily enough, what I've done fairly recently, I've got so many parallels in this that I just need to talk about it in this episode.
Okay, so let's start with the background then.
Okay, so the background is that my eldest daughter has a YouTube channel, which is all about ancient civilizations and archaeology, but it's quite sort of basically she's got a massive following and it's off the mainstream. So it's a bit like, I suppose you could say it's like your Richard Carrier's it's sort of a Robert M. Price kind of thing in biblical scholarship. It's within, but it's on the edge, and it's not mainstream. So what she is fascinated by is and got a lot of followers, and there's a lot of other channels like this out there on YouTube where people do a lot of research, even of the experts, and draw together sort of conclusions that they really feel will eventually change the mainstream science, so that things will come up and finally, a bit like the guy that changed that plate tectonics in the past, where they thought he was a nutter and fringe, and then suddenly that view became, so some of these people feel that these research into things will eventually become part of the mainstream. Other people just think it's sort of very fringe and will just always be like that and then disappear.
Is there one particular theory that she embraces, or can you characterize the aspect of things that she
a lot of it is to do with she particularly focuses on ancient Egypt, and she's been out there, she's going out there again. She's involved with a lot of people that sort of look at some of the Egyptian really probably ought to get her on this show to talk about this sort of thing, because Egypt, of course, does tie into a lot that we do in terms of biblical stuff. And she has been so fascinated by years that she's done a lot of research, even gone into the pyramids, literally climbed inside them and done sort of all kinds of stuff with tour groups and fascinated people who really believe, some of them experts in their field on, say, stone masonry and stuff, and just cannot believe how some of these things are cut, really find that the answers to mainstream sort of things aren't satisfactory, and so is pursuing that, and so managed to get quite a lot of people that are so fascinated by it. And so she does a lot of research on various monuments and artifacts that have been found all around the world, South America and stuff like that. And there is this sort of slight movement in the world of people who do think that there's perhaps more going on in the past than the world has heretofore found out. And yet, so you get that split between, wacky and are they onto something kind of scenario.
So she's the Eric von Daniken of her.
Well, yeah. Well, no, I wouldn't say she is, but some of the people that would follow her channel would be. Yes. Okay. And so therefore,
she's your daughter. I don't want to be rude.
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. She keeps her head firmly down on the planet. but some of the people on there, some of the comments that you might get on some of her episodes would be, well, of course, maybe it's an alien that did the pyramids or that sort of thing, So you get the problem is with that kind of show is that it does attract the most extreme, as well as some of the most serious people who just don't think the mainstream are, that they will crack one day at new evidence. And to be honest with you, the motive is new evidence, and is it there or is it not? So the link to Atlantis has what came out of studies that there's a mainstream geologist. So I suppose he's a bit like the Robert M. Price of geologists. He's like the Richard Carrier of geologists, and he has made a case that there is evidence for something in the Atlantic Ocean that sort of went down about 11,500 years ago, just scientifically. It just so happens.
So wait a minute. I assumed she was talking about sea level rise when I heard her talking about this.
What do you mean?
The Atlantis didn't go down, but the sea came up.
Wow!
Because of 11,000 years ago was the end of the ice age. When
That's right.
The ice sheets melted and the sea level rose.
It's more complicated than that. I think it's what you call the younger dryas situation where there was comets and stuff thrown hurtling into the earth and stuff, causing all kinds of stuff going on. So I don't think it's not just a sea level rise. In sea level rise may have been from an impact. My understanding is it's all to do with sort of an impacting thing. So I think the idea of this modern sort of movement to talk about Atlantis is that there's just, and this led me to do an incredible amount of research, and this led me to have the links to how I approach biblical stuff in the same way, and literary genre and cultural backdrop and all that sort of stuff came up in my research. Because the big thing that's being argued is this incredible link between Plato is the only person that mentions this city of or continent or island of Atlantis. That's the only source. That's the original source.
Yeah.
And he happens to mention that it happened 9,000 years before, which happens to fit this sort of era of geology where massive stuff happens. And people have gone, wow, that's what are the chances of that? And so that's where this sort of geology and Atlantis sort of come together in some people today. And so it really fascinated me on that side of things.
Yeah.
But I just before I sort of talk a bit more about that, it was really interesting, as the point you pointed, I came at this with no, I wasn't on one side and then moved to the other. I didn't really know much about Atlantis. So what do you two know of Atlantis? What does it mean to you as a word if someone says something about Atlantis?
Sunken continent, mythical.
Okay.
Yeah, a myth.
And having talked a lot about Bible stuff and mythical, how would you define myth? Because that's obviously a loose term that's thrown around.
Yes, okay. Well, when I think about the myth of Adam and Eve,
yes,
which is for us the sort of ultimate myth, it's something that was important for the community that came up with it, because it told them something to do with their identity and their history, and it didn't seem to matter its connection to reality. I'm not sure how much in their minds that lack of connection mattered, but it came that way. So the myth of the Exodus is a bit more rooted in history, and the myth of King David is even more rooted in history. So the further back you go, the less connection to history that we believe there is. But they all are myths that help define identity of a nation.
So that's right. So that
but
comes
whereas
up.
with this, with Greek myths, you feel it's just more fun and less kind of tied up with identity.
I suppose, because there's no churches on every corner that are sort of believing it or whatever. But yes, the myth language came up big time in the studies for Atlantis. So to sort of recap this original talking about this evening, so people who are listening are thinking, what are we doing here talking about this? The links of everything to do with my recent research in Atlantis has so tied into how I've approached biblical stuff, and it taps in to various ideas of ancient Egypt and Egypt that we know. And it's all to see. So my basically from that, I found myself thinking, I want to know about, I want to know about Atlantis. Why do people, the biggest thing was, why have people searched for it for years and never found it? Why has it been looked for everywhere? Some people have been so fascinated by this story that actually comes from Plato in about 360 BC. And so, my view had heard of Atlantis as a kid. You see it in some sort of movies. There was a 60s movie, a 70s one, an animation in the 2000s, I think. And the idea of Atlantis is like, as Francis said, a mythical continent that's lost island or continent, something like that. And it's actually evolved even from that. It's evolved into society a bit like it was the films I saw, that the sunken island carried on, and there was this underground civilization down at the bottom of the ocean, So that's nothing to do with Plato. That's part of myth making as we go along throughout history. And so when I got back, so why is everyone looking for it, and what's the source for it? Well, I found that there was basically, as I mentioned before, one source in 360 from Plato, 360 BC. And that's he speaks a lot about it, which is fascinating in itself. It's not just a passing reference. It's a lot of words, a lot of details, incredible detail, way more detail than say the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. Way more specific detail than that. So that led me to think this is fascinating. You know, what is it all about? Is he recounting history? Is he a historian? Has he got information from credible sources? Is there cross-referencing he can do? So the first thing I found out that Plato isn't a historian. I mean, I kind of knew that anyway, but he isn't. He's a philosopher, really. And all of his works are basically fictional dialogues. So he's not like Herodotus and some ancient historians who try to write something like what we would call history, but he's actually talking a lot of very information through conversations. So he doesn't say, oh, I want to write about Atlantis and here's how I heard about it. He puts a story about all kinds of subjects in a conversation, like after dinner or after a festival. So there's this like well-known festival in Greek history, and then he will say, you know, well, there was Socrates and there was this other guy, and it's always Socrates in there, by the way, nearly always. And there's these 3 or 4 or 5 people, and they all get together after a festival, and they say, hey, tell me about the ideal state for, you know, and so suddenly the other character goes on. So they're characters who are talking to each other. It's mostly accepted that these are fictional dialogues that are like a play, that Plato is basically the mind of all of them who's writing this story. So Atlantis comes out of that.
Okay, so let's stop for a minute.
Yeah.
So that is really very different from, say, the Genesis myths.
Yes.
So in what way are you making parallels?
Oh, right. Well, because that's the context that I found out, that this only source, everything else about Atlantis through history has basically been drawn from what Plato said. There's nothing earlier that's definite anyway. No archaeology, nothing like that. But in this fictional play,
so like Genesis, Garden of Eden, there's only ever one source. Maybe the flood's got different sources, but
it would be more like an author in, say, Daniel's period who got Jeremiah and a few other prophets earlier than him, all in a conversation at the same time. And they would say, tell me, Jeremiah, how was the world created? And he goes, well, let me just tell you, you sit back and rest. Well, there was this Adam and Eve, and you see what I mean? So we would find out about the Adam and Eve story through this conversation, a fictional one, between these famous prophets. So it's not history in that sense, the way it's being conveyed. It's like a play. Do you see what I mean? So, but the play is conveying an ancient myth. So in this play, one of the characters, Socrates, says something about the ideal state, and one of the other characters, called Critias, says, let me tell you a story that I heard. It was told to me by my grandfather. It was told to him by his grandfather. It was told to him by a friend, and him by this guy called Solon. They're all historical figures, by the way.
Yeah. So so we're doing better than Genesis. Because of
there's
the Adam and Eve story comes from nowhere. There's no one claiming, oh, I heard about it from so and so who was there,
right?
Or,
yes,
whose ancestor was there and who was told. There's no line of transmission.
No, we just get it, don't we? For the thing, we're here. There is in this fictional conversation between Socrates. Now, Socrates didn't say this, and the other guy, none of them said it. It's just a fictional motif of conveying what Plato wants to write. So Plato is saying everything here, but he's using it through the mouthpiece of these people. But one of the characters of these mouthpiece claims to be, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, claims to be 10 years old, heard the story from a grandfather, and then it claims that one of the guys went to Egypt, and the priests there told him this ancient story about Atlantis. So there's about 5 or 6 generations of stories.
So so this is now different.
That's the claim.
That Plato isn't saying this is a story that's current in our culture, and I'm now putting it down in words using this play format.
No,
it's saying this is something you've never heard before, and I'm now telling you because of.
Well, it's
absolutely,
but it's saying that within a fiction.
Exactly. This is part of the debate that I had with my daughter.
So that I think that's the problem, isn't it?
The problem is that it's most people concede that all of the other things that Plato writes about when he has these same fictional conversations, that no one is saying that they were taking notes and they were all passed down to
Yes.
Plato. They are just his. It's a bit like J.K. Rowling, really, having a conversation with Harry Potter and a few others, except that the figures that he uses for the conversations are historical. Like Socrates is always the main guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess what I'm coming from is
Yeah.
you're not trying to convince anybody that Atlantis is a myth, because everyone listening to this will have heard that Atlantis is a myth and will think, why would anybody
Think otherwise?
So
Yeah.
you're not trying to convince your daughter that she's barking up the wrong tree, because she's not listening to us.
Well, she.
So what I'm trying to get from you is what you learned about historical methods. And that kind of thing.
It was exactly
by doing this.
Exactly that. It was like, just to give the format of that's how the story of Atlantis has come through this fictional story, through telling that there was a train of historical passing on. So I immediately then had issues with, how can a story that big, that detailed, possibly have been kept accurate if Plato didn't invent it, which I think he did. Therefore, it doesn't matter. You just have a fictional group do this fictional story for all the points that Plato wants to make. But the people that believe in Atlantis say that no, somehow Plato got hold of this story and it's come down all these generations. Okay. The story says 9,000 years before Plato was writing, there was this island called a massive, gigantic island called, it wasn't called Atlantis, we've called it that, but it had Atlanteans on there. And there was also an ancient Athens. So this 9,000 years is way before any mainstream archaeology is accepted for an ancient Athens, and no one can see and knows about the island because it's not there anymore if it was. So that immediately makes all mainstream, basically, archaeologists say this is not real. This is a fiction, basically.
Yeah.
Because,
so what's now interesting in this scenario is we've got this island that's disappeared, that pretty well 99% of people who have looked into it think clearly is unreal. And you are now faced with somebody who thinks, no, it could be real.
Could be real.
This is really worth investigating.
Yes.
And you've got to convince them.
That's right. Well,
so that's the parallel.
And that's the debate I had. Yeah, that's the debate I had. Is it a fiction of Plato to make his own points to his current contemporary writers? This is a bit like the Book of Daniel thing, isn't it? Was it going to the 6th century, or was it he's casting himself back? Well, not quite like that, but basically, or is there a kernel of history way, way, way back in the past that has come down and led to this story? And so our debate on the channel was that she's arguing that the story is preserved mostly intact, but maybe changes here, there, and everywhere else. And I'm saying the whole thing's an invention of Plato's mind. So that's a vast difference. And I went to, when I was reading sort of Bart Ehrman's book on memory and how the Gospels came about, what happened before the Gospels were written, these stories that developed and evolved and changed. There's so much time for that to happen. Even if we could argue that Plato didn't make the story of Atlantis up, that story starting 9,000 years before and somehow being passed all the way down to these Egyptian records, apparently 8,000 BC, they were written down evidently in the story. How accurate could that possibly be if that happened? And then when it was told to Solon, then told to the friend, then told to the grandfather, then told to the son, how in the telling, if it was possible, this is what believers in Atlantis believe, that all of this was passed down this way, how in current studies could that possibly be intact, that much detail over pages and pages and pages, without any kind of embellishment, changes, wrong things, wrong memories? So to me, my own studies of how memory worked, even in sort of oral traditions, it wouldn't stand a chance that whatever kernel might have happened, it could have been a little island off New Zealand that was about, 20 miles long and morphed into a giant one in the Atlantic Ocean that could almost, what it says in the text, it's bigger than Libya and Asia put together, this island. And the kingdoms are bigger than that as well. And so I just led to think everything was coming at me from literary points of view, that this couldn't possibly be historical, whereas other people say it is. And the reason they say it is because of this whole geological period happens to fit Plato's 9,000 years. If you go back 9,000 years from Plato and look at geology, apparently there was things happening that could have knocked an island out of the Atlantic Ocean, So that's where it comes together,
And this is a point that's I think is probably specific to the Atlantis story, and may not have much relevance to our own issues with stories in the Bible. But how do they account for the 9,000 years being as a part of the story? I mean, that would seem to require that every person who told it sort of added on the time period from the last person. So the first person who says I heard this a month ago, and then the next person who tells it says I heard it 2 months ago, and the person they tell it to memorizes 2 months ago, and they remember to add I heard it 4 months ago, and so it would have to kind of build up like that, and I just don't see how that would be possible.
That's my thing as well, except of course what you've got there is in the story that's being told by this table talk kind of conversation, that Atlantis was in battle with ancient Athens. So right there, you've got these two things that no one agrees archaeologically. Certainly Athens wasn't around then, but that's what the story says. It was 1,000 years later that records started to be kept of the story. So it's fixed in stone, apparently, like written in cuneiform.
But I thought there weren't any records. Where does it say the records are kept? I thought the whole point was that the only record was Plato, and he just says it's 9,000 years ago. No. The only record that we have in terms of what we can read is Plato. Oh.
In Plato's writings, his character Critias says, here's something that was passed down to me from these generations. The priest in Egypt, 600 BC, met this guy called Solon on his travels and said, look, let me tell you about you Greeks. He says, you Greeks don't really know much at all, but let me tell you, there was an ancient Greece. And there was an ancient Atlantean island, and they were at war 9,000 years ago. We've got records of it from 8,000 years ago. So there is a 1,000 year gap of hearsay, which is crazy. That anything could happen. But even so, what's written, it's claimed that it's written down in never been found, of course. If it had been found, we would then corroborate. This is how it works. You would use Plato's story. Oh, we've now found the story written in tablets in Egypt in 600 BC that go back 8,000 years. If that was true, I wouldn't be having the discussion that I had. I'd say, right, we need to find out what's the reality behind the ancient Egypt story. But there isn't. No one's found it. It's just in the writings of Plato that it is there. But that could be a fiction. I mean, Plato could be doing all kinds of crazy stuff as he does. So the more I read about Plato and why he might say stuff about Atlantis, it became more obvious to me that when the story talks about Athens as the ideal place 9,000 years before the current place where he is, it's perfect for him because he's saying, look, once we were great, once we were the best, and we even fought off these Atlanteans in this massive island in the Atlantic Ocean, and then the gods judged them and sunk it and stuff like that. And so there's all the reasons for Plato to write this stuff, but so again, my research just led me to show, just by looking at you don't just want one source. Why would you believe just one source? And that comes from a lot of stuff that we've talked about. You want, what's the word? Multiple sources. You want something else. There's nothing that corroborates Plato's story in archaeology that I've ever found anywhere.
So what's interesting to me is what it was the positive case that convinced your daughter, and you were kind enough to share the link to this discussion you had on YouTube. So that'll be in the show notes, of course. And Francis and I have watched it.
Yes.
There's two things I can remember that caused her to positively think, okay, there's a case to be made here. And then a lot of her discussion was fending off your critiques.
Yes.
But when it came to actually what positively led her in that direction to treat it more seriously, one was the timing and place that apparently, according to her, this archaeologist said something interesting was happening in that place at that time, 9 to 11,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was this wonderful, maybe my ears prick up and I kind of giggle to myself. She used the argument from Embarrassment. Did you notice that?
Yes.
She said that it makes it look bad on the Greeks that they'd forgotten all this.
Yes.
So if Plato was making it up, he would, no way would he have put it into the words and records of the Egyptians, because that makes the Greeks look whatever, embarrassingly bad at keeping their history intact or something. And that was a positive argument.
Yes. But my answer to that was, of course, in the details, Plato evidently, again, it's all to do with the research and what you read, but Plato is a very clever person. And if you look at the details of the story, he puts ancient Athens 1,000 years before that city where the records are kept of Zeus, which means, in fact, he's subtly having the last laugh. So the Egyptians are telling him that Athenians and Athens was the first place to be made. So that means that the readers are going to go away thinking, oh, so the Egyptians are only 8,000 years ago and we are 9,000 years ago. Okay. Yes. So that means that could be a way of saying, because another thing that came out, as you probably saw in the video, that another fictional conversation the day before in Plato's writing, Socrates was talking about the ideal state. The Atlantis story and ancient Athens shows Athens to be the ideal state that Socrates has just been talking about. It's so uncannily similar that there's the reason right there. Plato wants to have a story. Well, actually, we were first. So the criterion of embarrassment that you're talking about, my argument was if
I think
Egypt was first and Athens came next, that you would have a point in the story. Yeah.
But to me, it shows that it's a very weak argument. I think Mark Goodacre has been saying that a lot over the last 10 years or so.
Well, the other I suppose the other thing is you have to try and work out what at the time they would have considered embarrassing. I mean, I think one difficulty is that you don't know what Plato's attitude would have been to how the Greeks forgetting something, because his attitude might have been that he was trying to bring a fallen generation of Greeks and sort of bring them up to strength. So it might all have played into his attitude of wanting to, a bit like the ancient Hebrew prophets,
Daniel. Yeah.
Yes, sort of how you've let yourselves down. You've got to get back to the
exactly
to the original.
Yeah.
But I suppose another way of looking at it is that in terms of the story that's being told, you have to put in if it was made up, you have to put it in some explanation as to why this isn't common historical currency in Greece. You're saying to your audience, this is our real history, and then you have to come up with some explanation as to why you're telling them, even in a work of fiction, that something is their history. If they're all going to be saying, "Oh, we don't remember that. That's history, really?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
How come nobody ever told us about it?"
Yeah.
So even for a work of fiction, you still have to sort of put it in place and explain things. A bit like in Harry Potter, there are various explanations for why the wizards and the muggles can coexist, and
yes,
and how they have, and how the two worlds occasionally cross over and muggles don't understand what's going on. And it all has to be explained within the fiction, so to sort of encourage people to suspend their disbelief.
So I'm getting parallels here.
Yes,
with the story of the women.
Yes, with Mark. Yes,
with Mark. Yeah, because that we get from one source really, and everyone else copied Mark.
Yeah.
But the main thing is the big argument people use for why this is real is the criterion of embarrassment, and that is that no way would you have women as your key witnesses. So they assume that Mark's purpose is to convince the world that this happened.
Yeah.
And So of course he would talk about the best witnesses possible, and it's embarrassing that he has got these women, so that must mean it happened. So that's a big argument for the tomb being empty that people seem to come up with again and again.
There is parallels, but definitely there. Yeah,
and then keeping the parallel going, we can assume, or we can guess, I should say, that actually Mark had another purpose, which wasn't that. And he also wanted to put in material to explain why no one had heard of this before, which is what we've just been talking about with the Atlantis thing. And so Mark putting the women as the witnesses and then saying they disappeared and told nobody allows him to both say it happened and explain why no one had ever heard of it. So that's only a theory.
So
I might be
he was
wrong.
sort of saying, these silly women got scared and decided to keep, just ran away. They ran away and they were scared. Yeah.
So just in the same way that in Greek culture nobody had heard of Atlantis before Plato wrote about it.
Yeah.
We would assume. We could also guess that nobody had heard of the story of the empty tomb until Mark wrote about it, or Mark's source of writing about it. And so it needed to include the story of the women experiencing it, but not telling anybody. And then the assumption is maybe, they did tell Mark eventually in their old age or something. And so now this amazing event that nobody had ever heard of before actually really happened, and we can celebrate it.
Yeah, you're right. And in the Plato story, there's little hints of trying to deal with why no one heard of it. And it's not part of the Greek, or apparently all the other Greek stuff is kind of interlocked. So as Francis was saying, it wasn't, let me just give you more detail about, you've heard of Atlantis, everybody? Yeah, here's a bit more detail. It's not like that. It's like, there's very clear reasons, like apparently when it happened, it's so funny, there's a whole passage, a few paragraphs that says that the survivors of the islands, they had to admit the survivor from Atlantis when it sank into the ocean, weren't really interested in writing anything down. It was assuming there was writing then, of course. They were just wanting to get busy getting their life back together, and they didn't really recall much. It's really funny. It's in the story. It's in the story, and it's like, okay,
so you're covering your tracks.
You're covering track. That to me came out as completely covering the tracks.
Yeah,
it's like someone's going to say, well, a bit like that. Well, how come we didn't hear the empty tomb? How come we've never heard? Well, they weren't really interested. I'll tell you what, they did remember some names, but they didn't remember what they did. These kings of the island, and it's like, okay, because if they did, Plato would be knowing all these. Socrates' character could probably come in and say, but why haven't we heard of this then? Well, here's the answer. So he was covering himself. There's more than that, though. There's other things where you feel he's covering. Some of the things are so unbelievable that he goes, now, whether you all believe this or not, this is what I remember as a child when I heard the story, and so all of this is in the story, and it's like, wow, it's so fascinating. To me, there's clues that you can find that it's a fabrication, but the Atlantis believers will have none of this, because their big thing is this happened timing between, if it was 5,000 years, 20,000 years, then there's no great geological thing that could have knocked an island out of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is that for the last 150 years, 200 years, people have looked for Atlantis everywhere in the world. It's been Australia, it's been England, it's been the Americas, it's been Turkey, it's been southern Spain, it's been North Africa. And all of these people, my daughter would say, and other followers, well, they didn't know about the Younger Dryas thing. And this one particular archaeologist is absolutely certain that something happened in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but not as big as the island of the story. So that's where, this is where people can change the text. This is what we were debating about. Well, perhaps bigger than Libya thing means bigger and greater in power, not so much the size, So all of it, we've seen this in Bible stuff, that people do that, don't they? The flood couldn't have been global, so maybe.
It
Well,
was all the globe they knew.
It's all the globe they knew. That's right. Yeah.
So I was thinking Mount Ararat, trying to find Mount Ararat.
Yes.
And the Ark.
Yes,
it's like trying to find Atlantis.
Yes, it's the same thing, isn't it? And so, you see, it says it's land. Yes, it's the mountains of Ararat, so that gives us bigger space to look. Not Mount Ararat, because we've looked there.
Yeah.
So and so my feeling was in the debate, and by the way, that was only part one. The part two we did twice as long, and she just broke it into two. So there's a whole second part. We recorded it about 6 weeks ago,
it was good fun. You both did really well. It was entertaining.
I was beginning to wish I'd done the debate when she was 7 years old, because she gave me a tough time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the comments say we're so like each other.
Yeah.
We were actually neck and neck in the way we talk. Very quick, and it's like when I was watching it, I thought, gosh, it's like arguing against myself. So it's like she did give me a run for my money in a way. I quite enjoyed it. But it was like really like nice, but slightly feisty, but nice feisty. So I felt that with all this memory stuff getting lost, why on earth would the 9,000 years possibly be said to be the one thing that didn't change? When suddenly every Atlantis believer changes something in the text because it doesn't fit where they've looked, well, it must have been, it's outside the Straits of Gibraltar. So some go, well, he must have got that wrong. It must be inside the Straits of Gibraltar, so everyone's willing to do that. But when it comes to this particular version of looking for Atlantis, the 9,000 years have to be unchangeable, and that's come down over 9,000 years through these Egyptian records. So I was saying, no, I think it's more likely that it's just one of those coincidences that he just picked 9,000 years. It's too far back for anyone to really know about, and it just happens to fit the way things can go in life. There's a lot of coincidences, I think. Well, it's a fairly
minor thing to this coincidence to build the whole structure
because I said that, because I noticed in debating with her that, and particularly other people that follow it, they will look at the words a bit like fundamentalists do. If it doesn't fit the theology, you say, well, the word could mean this, and it's
so
like,
plenty of that.
Yeah, I've got plenty of that. So, but suddenly it's like, well, what about the 9,000 years could have meant something? No, it has to be 9,000 years. Well, what about Libya and Asia being bigger than? Well, it could mean this. It could be translated this. So I did notice a similar thing to fundamentalists who will go to translations where it suits them.
Yes.
This happened on the recent Unbelievable with Glenn Scrivener and Bart Ehrman. I don't know. Well, I mentioned that point, but that was a similar thing where somebody there was literally building a case from the NIV translation, and
that's right.
That was on Adam, a Garden of Eden, where Adam, Glenn Scrivener was trying to make this case that Eve was the pinnacle of creation as we get from the simpler and simpler and simpler. And it only works, as Bart Ehrman pointed out, on the case that the animals had been formed before. But the Hebrew doesn't allow that. In the flow of Genesis 2, it's so God put the man in the garden, so God did this, so God formed the animals out of the ground and brought them to Adam. But they like to go with, so God had formed the animals out of the ground, and because otherwise it blows that nice theory out of the water. And this is what I believe people are doing with the Atlantis story. They do that sort of thing. Take a translation that would just about squeeze to say, look in North Africa for it, or just about squeeze to do this. And I can see the same mindset. It's like the belief comes first. We really do think Atlantis was there for some instinctive reason. So it's back to that thing. I want Atlantis to be a real island in the ocean that went down. So we will make it so. And
this, really not too deep in the geological evidence, but it's the same, that there is absolutely no geological evidence for the flood.
Yeah.
And where there is geological evidence, particularly in my area of sediment flow in rivers and things, you could see that the geology is in keeping with not a big worldwide flood, but with geology doing its thing, laying levels of gravel and of sand in floodplains and things, and then later geological activity squashing it and twisting it and heaving it about with plate tectonics. So the geology is in keeping with what you actually see, is in keeping with this sort of punctuated gradualism that we have as a picture of the Earth. Big things occasionally happen. Like the asteroid strike. There's a tiny layer of soot or something that's there. You can find all over the place. But the big thing of massive everything being underwater, it's just no way it can fit the flood can fit with what we see. And it sounds the same with this situation as well, because she talked about mud quite a lot.
Well, yes, that's because in the story it talks about mud shoals at the mouth. It seems to me, this is where we debated, but the mouth of Gibraltar Straits, and you can no longer go out to navigate the sea anymore. And so in Plato's story, that's because the island of Atlantis was there. When it sunk, it left mud shoals. Okay, and that's what the story says. And so,
but you see, if there were mud shoals, and there was kind of tide going up and down, it would almost instantly drive a channel through to let the tide get in and out of the Mediterranean. So there's no way a mud shoal can close up the Straits of Gibraltar.
It's funny because Aristotle, who was the student of Plato, actually mentions the mud shoals, which is funny because he doesn't mention Atlantis at all. And so it's possible that there may have been a sort of a myth that you couldn't navigate into the Atlantic because of mud shoals. It was just a myth that came down. Yeah. And Plato may have gone with his story. I can give a good reason where that came from. It's going to be in my fictional island. You know what I mean? So that's another possibility that we were talking about for this sort of, because who knows how the stories come down. But the people on her side all believe that seafaring went on way back thousands of years before mainstream have normally said so. I'm not sure if that's changing now or not, but the idea that really blew me away wasn't so much, so what if there was an island there of some sort? It may have had some animals on it and maybe originally maybe hominids or whatever. But in the story, it's not like that. Poseidon, the gods come down, mate with mortal women and start 10 kingdoms on the island. These are known mythical Greek gods. I don't think Plato would have thought that was historical. And Francis, you probably have something to say on this, because certainly all the people back then seem to mix mythical stuff with historical stuff together with no issue. So,
well, Plato, I haven't read those dialogues. I have to confess that.
Right. Okay.
But Plato, I don't think, believe in the Greek gods as represented. I mean, he thought that was just a complete misrepresentation of God, who was actually, his view was, I suppose, somewhat like the Christian view of God, that God was the highest and above all that. Yeah. And so if he wrote about Greek mythical gods as we know them from Greek mythical stories, he would not have been intending that to be taken literally, because he didn't believe in those gods.
Exactly.
He thought they were, he thought they were a right shower of ne'er-do-wells.
Exactly.
Absolutely, no claim to divine status at all.
They were embarrassed about them. And so a Christian view of God, by the way, could have more likely come from the Greeks against the Old Testament Yahweh. So they have a lot to answer there. But so that's another thing. So Poseidon and all these gods and Athena form Athens, and there's definitely this interaction with gods and mortals, and how they sort of, like you said, what myth, going back to your point, Ed, on myth, what those mythical gods, even from a Greek point of view, for the listener of those dialogues, would they have gone away? They're not thinking that these gods were historical. And yet this historical gods start kingdoms on an island. So at one point, where are you going to mix history here? And I made that point on the debate, and but basically they all talk like that. So lots of people talk about, a mix of God stuff and human stuff going on.
So he's giving a hint to the more intellectual people who are the audience of this
play or dialogue,
to say, look, between you and me, we know this is just some fun.
Yes, yeah. There might be some 19th century plebs that go on a boat and look for the island. But Plato didn't know that was going to happen. Matter of fact, nobody in history really took it up much. It's pretty well established fairly strongly that Aristotle thought it was a fiction, and that's his student. So Socrates was his mentor, but dead at the time when he wrote it. So he might have been quite embarrassed that Plato used his mouthpiece as part of that conversation. But if Aristotle, the student, thought it was a fiction, it's amazing how later down, particularly to the 19th century, It was all literalized. Again, another parallel with fundamentalism and ancient church fathers, by the way. They were kind of allegorical, particularly about the Old Testament. And then you get back into the 19th century.
Yes, that's right. They were open to the Garden of Eden being an allegory.
Exactly. And then you get to the Ken Hams, who absolutely literalized the whole thing. And this is what some Atlantis people are doing with the story, I feel. So that's another parallel with everything we do and my debate about Atlantis. I found that parallel right there.
Yeah.
You know? And so I did feel that I do understand where she's coming from. She's coming from a geological point of view and then looking at the story and going, wow, it's interesting. I'm coming from a literary point of view and going, wow, that's not so interesting. You know,
yes.
Or it's interesting in a different way.
Yes, interesting from another angle. I'm going to go, oh, that's okay. So you've got a time frame that Plato happens to hit on there. You could talk about an island, but this island was very civilized. It was very detailed. It was so like ancient. It's so advanced for what anybody would say, except for the people who are on the fringe. It was an advanced ancient civilization battling an advanced Athens, by the way, of 9,000 years. So you need to get digging to see Athens was my point. If there's evidence of ancient Athens and for 9,000 years, then you could go, okay, now that's interesting. Okay, that would get my interest. Because, so the story talks about an ancient Athens 9,000 years ago. If somebody discovered that and suddenly all the science changed and they said it's not 3,000, it's 9, then I would go, okay, now we've got some corroborating ideas. But until Athens is found, the story has to be fiction, even just on that grounds for me, you know. Anyway, but yeah, so that was really my my endeavor, and it's still ongoing.
I don't know if this is relevant. There was a lovely In Our Time episode with Melvin Bragg on Doggerland, which is...
Hannah's done a whole thing on that as well. Done a whole episode on Doggerland.
Oh, okay. Because of... Well, Doggerland was a thing, and they found, posts, wooden posts and other evidence of human occupation, and it went underwater about that time.
Yep, that's right.
When the ice melted.
She's done a whole thing on Doggerland, and she just approaches Atlantis in the same way. And
so how come Doggerland, we know exactly where it is, and we've got all the evidence of archaeological evidence of humans living on it and everything. And whereas for her other one, Atlantis, there's no evidence at all. Well,
that's where she would have a fit if she heard that. With this Randall Carlson guy, he's done about 12 hours of stuff about his archaeological research into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He would say, now he's like your Robert M. Price, Richard Carrier of archaeology. So he's bona fide, but fringe, not accepted yet. But if he's an Alfred Wegener, and one day in hundreds of years, they'll say, Randall Carlson, now he changed the face of geology. Fine, I'm open for that. It happened with plate tectonics. It could happen for someone else. But he would say that there is this sort of evidence of a landmass that was once there, but it was about 350 miles, not massive.
And how far underwater is it?
We're all right at the bottom now, at the join of the, I don't know. I mean, this is the thing where...
Dogger Bank isn't that far underwater.
No, it's not, because once the sea level was lower, wasn't it? It was all joined. Yeah, that's right. Oh, no, this would be much deeper. And again, all the stuff that's written in the story on the island of Atlantis, I would have thought there would be something at the bottom of the ocean that could have been found by now. I don't know how deep it is there. So it's out of my remit. I was really doing all my study on oral tradition, literary, Plato's backdrop, context, what reason he might have had to say it if it's not historical. I was doing everything in that realm, and I was really keeping away from geology, where she does almost everything in geology and then taps into the story. So we're coming at it from very, very different angles. So it'd be like someone who's, I don't know, who's an expert on the Tigris and Euphrates in geological, and then they look at Genesis. Okay. And then they go, oh, well, I know the Tigris and Euphrates, and oh my gosh, Genesis talks about Tigris and Euphrates. So if I follow this, I might get to the Garden of Eden. It's that kind of thing. Whereas the literary people just say that it's mythical, even if it's using historical rivers, it's still a mythical story. And so the Tigris is not going to lead you to Adam, or bones of the talking snake, so that's the way I see it. Whereas the other side don't see it like this. They think you will find eventually I don't know, artifacts, presumably, of this massive, wonderful ancient civilization on an island in the Atlantic. And so it's yeah, so that's the world that I've inhabited recently. So I came in it with no bias, though. I honestly didn't know what to think. I just came. I was persuaded. Like, I'm often like thinking, why do nearly all, or every classicist in mainstream universities not accepted as historical? That's so powerful. So I've got to be brilliant to overturn that. You know, and so. Some of the classicists do believe that Plato may have been inspired by local islands disappearing much nearer his time and using that as an idea. Yeah. So that's how authors get ideas, isn't it? You hear something, you see something, or there's something in the news, you go, oh, it's a great idea for a story. That's probably what happened, possibly what happened with Plato. So it's not like I'll think of a crazy story. It's like, oh, this civilization went down. It was quite small. I'll do a story of a real giant one a long time ago. And so that's how the only link to history I can see happening to it. Like the flood in the Bible, maybe some ancient real floods that were pretty massive, wiped out, came down through some oral stories. And then the writers started to create stories, embellish it, and eventually it becomes a worldwide flood, you know? Yeah. Okay.
So did you learn anything else from the exercise of particularly starting quite happy to be persuaded either way, not having it, just doing research without skin in the game? Whereas nowadays when you do research, you're set on your old conclusions about how the Old Testament is myth and everything. And when you started the journey 20, 30 years ago, you wanted it all to be true.
Yeah.
Skin in the game the opposite way.
Going the opposite way.
Now you're just completely chilled and relaxed and not on defensive or at all.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I learned from this is that I felt that I understood why classicists don't take the story as historical, and I kind of joined them and understood why the mainstream think the way they do. And that's probably what I learned from this. I didn't become one of the fringe believers through my research, and yet I didn't know anything about the subject much before I looked at it. So that's this version. In the Christianity, like you say, I was sort of wanting it to be true years ago, and I still found it not to be, and that was quite different. And so here I thought, you know, I mean, I was willing to be. I mean, she gave me a run for my money. She certainly challenged my own logic. If I followed a logical progression, she might pick out that logic and then and I can see where she starts her logic and goes down that path. And so I did learn a lot about how other people think.
Yes,
you know, but I know that anyway from how fundamentalists think and Christians think. I just don't know how Atlanteans think. So I've learned that. So it's another world that I've inhabited, but I wanted to bring it into this show because there were these parallels, which you've seen as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, and I would also, by the way, like open like evolution stuff. If something came up that corroborated that story outside of Plato and independent from it, then I would be fascinated by that. I wouldn't go, oh, well, that can't be true, and just dismiss it. I'd say, wow, okay, now that might change things. But by the way, have you heard about this massive thing that may be so big in biblical archaeology, or it may not be, about this new thing that's been found with the oldest so far name of Yahweh?
Yes. I don't know what to make of that.
Well,
because it's all it's got that dubious.
It has, yes.
That it's not been peer reviewed. Everyone's shouting out about it.
Everyone is shouting out about it. Yeah, and they did that with the James box. No, not James box. The first century fragment of Mark.
Yes, we've been here before.
They went mad about it, and all the fundamentalists were on stage and say, "We've got it. We're now in the first century. We're there," and they're embarrassed now because they were wrong.
What is this about the oldest name of Yahweh?
Do you want to do it, Ed, or I can?
I don't really get its context, but it's a small piece of lead which is about the size of a playing card or something like that.
That's right. Yep.
It's rolled up, and it's got a curse written on it. and there really is quite an aggressive curse about how Yahweh is going to smite you. So I guess that makes it highly plausible.
What was his oldest name? Oh, I see. It was still Yahweh, but it was
but no, it's the oldest written name of Yahweh, like 150 years.
I thought they weren't supposed to write his name.
Yes, it's probably been. I think it's not.
Well, it's still the same thing. It's just the way it is written. In other words, it's still written, but it's written in a certain way that you can't say it.
And something is significant in where it was found in relation to a mountain that's mentioned in one of the Torah books.
I've done a similar. I've done some research into it and found it like. This is going to be interesting because they're making it so big. This is going to revolutionize. It's going to support the Exodus that it happened now. It's going to support that they wrote Hebrew much earlier. In other words,
it supports how horrible Yahweh is.
Well,
that's for sure.
No one is saying that. I'm thinking, hang around. Yes, it does show. It's like it's these violent curses and thinking, okay, so more support for the tribal deity of Yahweh. Yeah, people don't think like that. They go, oh my gosh, it means there's writing early. But apparently, I mean, it's quite a fundamentalist Christian, but bona fide archaeologist has found it apparently, but it's found in a slightly dubious way because it was in excavations that was done in the 80s, and they're going through the waste from it and have now looked at it and realized, oh my gosh, they threw away something amazing. And other people who are more on the liberal end of stuff or doubting end are being very, very cautious. But James Tabor is actually quite serious about it himself. Like the guy who found it is kind of a friend of his, even though they are poles apart in belief. It seems to have a little bit more credibility than everyone that was talking about Mark, that fragment, but it could just go backwards. It could backfire massively.
Yeah. So, I mean, was it some person like a fake antiques person sort of found it and said, this is how we got it because it was from this rubbish heap. And
that's the St. James ossuary that happened that way that year, about in 2002, with it had James, the brother of Jesus, on it. And the fact that the Mark one, I think it was that so many people just jumped the gun and said this is it, and it hadn't been peer reviewed, it hadn't come out, hadn't been looked at by all the experts, and then it was embarrassing. They all had to scurry away. I can't believe they've come out so strong for this after that. They should have learned the lesson and say, we won't say a word until all the skeptics look at it. or not even skeptics, just everybody looks at it.
Yes. But I think I remember from probably a P10's podcast, Bible for Normal People, discussion of the name of Yahweh. And that in itself is a bit interesting because
mysterious.
The name came from one direction, from the south or something of Israel.
That's right.
And the rest of the stuff that's embedded in comes from somewhere completely else. And it makes it very difficult for people to make conclusions of the origins of the Hebrew nation, because these two quite separate sources, the name of Yahweh and pretty well everything else. This is don't quote me on this because it's a vague memory.
Kenton Sparks and other people talk like that. It's almost as if somebody sort of left Egypt, was wandering around and got lost, disappeared, found a community and started talking about Yahweh to mix the different areas where it possibly came from.
So just picking up, we found this ancient thing about Yahweh. Is only half the puzzle piece.
Yeah, I think it's going to cause more. Christopher Rollinson is a very, very one of the top experts in the world in this sort of thing, and he wrote a very cautious article about this whole thing and saying, you have to be cautious with this sort of thing. And he gave all good reasons of what it could mean, what it may not mean, and yet it's funny how the fundamentalist evangelical is much more vocal about this when they get something that they think is supportive. Can you imagine though we've
sort of done that?
Yeah,
when Robin Walsh came out with this thing with hang on a minute, we've thought of Mark wrong all this time and having arguments about if this, that, and the other. It's just a trope that they use and people like us are jumping all over it.
Yeah, that's true.
Human nature is like that.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. That's true. But again, acknowledging that Robin Walsh is a minor view at the moment.
Yes, but we kind of tend to write about it as if
as if it's the
scholars now
mainstream.
agree.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But it keeps the pot boiling. But you're right. I mean, but then again, if this thing said something that was very contrary to Christianity in some way, like it said Yahweh had a wife and you Israel followers must worship her or something, you would bet your bottom dollar they'd be saying, "Oh, it was found in a bin, was it?" Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. You know what I mean? So everyone's got their stake.
There are indications that Yahweh had a wife.
Oh no, that's already established. But what I mean, if this was further on that,
I see.
Yeah. Or basically, if you could think of something that would completely throw a stone in the belief system of evangelicals, they would probably be pressing for. Hang around, it was found in the waste from somebody who did excavations in the 80s. We're a bit concerned about that. Whereas because they believe it says something that's so affirming and might radically change the way we think about ancient Hebrew history, or at least confirm it back to a more fundamentalist way, of course, they wouldn't do that. And it's the skeptics that are saying, "Oh, it's found in a bin," and so again, it does produce sides,
Yeah, so, and we have to just we're all like that. We're as good as each other.
Except I don't think that there's been. Well, has there been a reverse of the Mark fragment idea where skeptics are coming out saying, "Right, we've got this. This completely shows that Mark borrowed his story from a Greek storyteller." And then we proclaim it, and then suddenly it's all debunked. Maybe there have been quite a few. Maybe there have been a few of that. Where the skeptical side have been dogmatic on something and then been embarrassed later. Fair enough, but at least it equals out, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think wasn't there people saying that Nazareth didn't exist in ancient times or something like that?
Yes, there was a group,
and then that was proved wrong.
Yeah. I think same with other people like, it was quite established, I suppose, that David didn't exist. And then there's this fairly strong evidence that there was someone called David, which seems to have sort of is now the mainstream. And so that doesn't mean it's true and as historical as everything you read about David, but at least there was a figure. And so, maybe
even Pontius Pilate, I think critical scholars in the Victorian times poo-pooed him completely and said he's a mythical figure, didn't they?
Right. I suppose
he's now been definitely confirmed as real.
Yeah. I mean, I did hear somebody talk the other day who's an evangelical who actually was very fair on this and said, look, because some of them would just say, pointing the things you've just pointed out, look, they used to say this, they used to say this, used to say that. Now look what we found. But what they haven't said is we have our own embarrassments like Mark and But somebody the other day did say that. I think it was Inspiring Philosophy guy. Or the
lovely Randall Rouser.
Yeah,
if you want something sensible from evangelicals,
he would say something like that. He would say, "Look, we've had our own embarrassments. Okay, let's just call it quits. Let's call it quits while we're ahead." But I'm really eager to know what happens with this because I can see why they should really be much more responsible because of the Mark incident, which only happened about 4 years ago. The fragment of Mark that they were so convinced was the first century that they were preaching to their audiences in America
for about 5-6 years. Well, it's about to come out.
Josh McDowell, so excited. All these others. That's right. It was Josh McDowell's son. Now he's a lot more reserved about this thing because he went all through the Mark story. I think
good for him.
It's not going to be one of these videos like some of them on the Mark fragment where they're virtually preaching it to the audience, before it's been peer reviewed. What's going on?
Okay, well, here's your chance, Andrew. You do your thing about how this could really be real, and we must learn from this because this could be genuine.
The humble thing would be that even though it's found and promoted at the moment early ahead of peer review by fundamentalist evangelicals and other evangelicals, they may have found something that might change the course of how we currently understand some of the ancient Hebrew history. And it might affect things that, it's like finding a fossil that changes your view of evolution a bit. And so, so I'm prepared to say that.
And how would it change your view? Would it make the Exodus thing more real? more likely to be historical?
I tend to be more radical, a bit like you were earlier, thinking here's another proof that they believe God was this barbaric warrior god who smites people with curses.
Okay,
So,
it was good while it lasted.
So it's good. So I would tend to think that it's another, if they find evidence of Joshua's walls coming down closer to the story, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he looks like if the god was real, he really is that kind of god. So I tend to go that way in terms of thinking, oh wow, we found evidence of Sodom and Gomorrah, that he really did burn the people to bits, and so I tend to be on that view when I think about things like this, or evidence of a global flood. So he did flood all these men, women, and children. So you can't. In my view, there's no win in one sense, because if you do win with archaeology, you lose with the character of God.
Yeah, because you can't allegorize it.
So
great, yeah.
And
we had some material on perfection, which so that's now a little hint. That's what's coming up next time.
On perfection, yes, yeah. The perfect podcast.
Well, there was a bit of overlap when we talked about the messy, not far from perfect Greek gods compared to the later thought that made God into this pure Platonic, pure form of God that's perfect, and that then influenced Christianity.
Absolutely. So
we'll be looking at that next time.
Next time, yeah.
Look forward to that.
Yep.
Okay.
So Andrew, thank you, and thank Johanna as well for contributing indirectly to our.
Thank you, Johanna.
Yes.
And
it was very impressive. It was, as you say, two of you head to head.
Great.
Oh, there we go.
There'll be also a link to the debate in one hop as well. We'll do it both ways.
So, until next time, it's been a very. It has. I say everything's interesting, but this has been like radically interesting to bring in Atlantis into this podcast. But there you go, and it may not sink without a trace. So, until next time, I've been Andrew, your host,
and I've been Frances.
And Ed is frozen.
Oh, and Ed's been Ed, and he's gone.
He's gone.
Yes,
down.
I froze. I completely froze.
That's great. The gods are interfering here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Until next time, then. Bye.